Very glad to have you all here this evening. We've got a wonderful program for you. My name is Neil Vandry. I'll be your officiator, and I'd like to let you know about a few things. The first is next month, July, we will not be here. July will be going dark as we are all getting ready and getting prepared for the RAD Festival. Revolution Against Aging and Death Festival is the largest life extension enthusiasts festival that has ever occurred. At this moment, there are over 700 people signed up to go to the RAD Festival in San Diego. It's going to go from August 4th till August the 7th. We have a short clip we're going to put on here in just a moment. And before I do, though, I'd like to let you know a couple of things. How many are here for the very first time? First time here at the Church of Perpetual Life? Wow, that's great. It's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of you. Wonderful. And perhaps you heard about it from a friend? Okay. How many people saw the advertisement in the Sun, not advertisement, but the article in the Sun Sentinel newspaper? Saw the article in there? Wonderful. A couple of you came from that. Great. This is a good time to silence your phones. And also you'll notice in the outer sanctuary, we have a lending library on books that pertain to life extension and healthy living. And you're welcome to check one of those out. Bring it back next time. We won't be here in July, but you can bring it back out. And if you have given us your email address, I'll be able to contact you and let you know about the next event. So if you have not done so, please do so as you're leaving. I believe we've captured it as you've come in. And that's something that stays private with me, and that's for me to be able to notify you about upcoming events. So at this time, I'd like to bring up the RAD Festival clip. Doug, if you will. And this will tell you about the Revolution Against Aging and Death Festival that's going to occur. You can sign up for this, and we'll give you some information on that. You go to the radfest.com site. Go ahead, Doug.
RADFest is a gathering unlike any other. You are invited to learn, connect, get empowered, and celebrate with world-renowned experts in biology, nutrition, artificial intelligence, sociology, gene therapy, and more. Get the latest information and inspiration from entrepreneurs, futurists, philosophers, trend-seers, and trendsetters. Set in sunny San Diego, August 4th through the 7th, RAD, which stands for Revolution Against Aging and Death, is the largest festival in the world dedicated to the most revolutionary idea of our time. There is no doubt we are on the cusp of great change. From regenerative medicine to nanotechnology, cryonics to intelligent machines facilitating medical miracles. But we need the power of people together to support and accelerate these developments. RADFest is not only about life extension, but the future, and how we will get there together. RAD is the first event to address radical life extension holistically, covering a wide array of subjects from scientific breakthroughs and social challenges to lifestyle enhancements and ageless sexuality. RADFest is produced by the Coalition for Radical Life Extension, a non-profit organization whose mission is to bring about worldwide change in how radical life extension is viewed and understood, in order to generate greater support for a broad range of related initiatives from scientific research, social and psychological breakthroughs, and intellectual and artistic expression. All net proceeds support this great cause. If you are ready to challenge the status quo of aging and limitation, then you are not alone. It's time to take action, to take a stand, to get informed and inspired, and to come together for the largest gathering of radical life extensionists ever.
That's the RAD Festival. So if you have interest in going, by coming here, you can save $100 on signing up if you use the word perpetual when you go to sign up. If you're interested in any more information about this, please let me have an opportunity to speak with you about this. It's a most amazing thing. It could change your lives. At this time, what I'd like to do is bring up the founder of the Church of Perpetual Life, Mr. Bill Falloon.
Thank you, Neil. You know, it's interesting, Nikolai Fedorov, who's the prophet that this church is really was based on. We were set up based on his prophecy that at some point mankind would evolve to a point where death would no longer be a guaranteed aspect of humanity. And right now in Russia, the interest in biological age reversal is growing so quickly that several scientists have made 7 trips this year from the United States to Russia, because that's where they want to do the research. They don't have the inhibitions that we do in this country with an FDA that gets in the way, that delays the ability of scientists to move progress forward. So we're looking for some interesting events to occur coming out of Russia. For those who don't know everything about Ben Franklin, just type his name into Google, but he's another prophet. He talked about the idea of being preserved somehow after he died, because he thought technology would evolve to a point where he would be able to come back to life. He knew, though, that there was no way to preserve his body after death. He also knew that there would be cures for every disease that mankind was afflicted with, and that aging itself would someday be cured. So we were able to find an old letter he wrote to somebody, and it turned out that he knew ahead of time, way back in the late 1700s, that aging itself would be cured. And we are working on that 7 days a week. Right now, our mission is to accelerate age reversal research. We liken this to a renaissance, a biomedical renaissance. The European Renaissance, of course, it's defined as the time period in which the ignorance and irrationality of the Dark Ages was transformed into early modern society. Now, up until now, the Dark Ages were a terrible period, of course. The Renaissance resolved a lot of those problems, but scientifically, the Renaissance was viewed as the most significant era of scientific discovery and human advance. Well, what's going to happen with the biomedical renaissance, in which aging itself is going to be reversible? We're going to see an exponentially greater impact on societal and scientific thinking than did occur during the European Renaissance, which began 700 years ago. So reversing aging is the objective of our church, and what we like to do is bring up analogies, historic analogies, so people can understand the horrible problems when science is delayed. Penicillin was discovered in 1928, published the very next year in a respected scientific journal, and yet widespread availability did not become available until 1946. When you think of the number of children who died of bacterial infections, the horror that inflicted on their parents, and of course the parents and their parents dying of all kind of horrific diseases that could have been cured. You look at just a short list of these diseases, this is what was killing people between 1929 and 1946. People were dying as infants, as children, as adults, as older people. They were succumbing to bacterial infections. Antibiotics have wiped those out for the most part. And yet there was a horrific delay, a horrific delay. This is a chart we've shown in this church before, and it shows in 1900 the leading causes of death: tuberculosis, diphtheria, diarrhea, pneumonia. These problems were bacterial related for the most part, and it resulted in the human lifespan only being an average of about 47 years in 1900. And that lifespan, of course, has dramatically increased as a result of modern technology. But we look at what happened. That delay in introducing antibiotics, it killed in the United States at least 2 million people, and probably a lot more. We're talking about the delay between 1929 and 1946. All those people who were dying of bacterial infections could have been cured if the science had only been moved forward faster. So we're sponsoring the RAD Fest. We're really co-sponsoring it, the Revolution Against Aging and Death. And we have a mission to bring together the scientists who are on the cutting edge of research. And in one case, a study at Stanford is nearing a conclusion in which immune senescence in older people was able to be partially reversed. This is going to be published very soon, but this is a major scientific breakthrough, and a lot of the details will be announced at the RAD Fest. And of course, we'll be talking about that at this church. But again, analogies, because it proves what we need to do with this church and what our mission is. The delay in introducing penicillin to the general public resulted in an outrageous number of people dying over a prolonged period of time. If someone had just taken the energy and put the people together to learn how to mass produce it earlier, millions of human beings would have been spared. And think about a child dying at the age of 3. They'd still be alive now, some of them. But unfortunately, that horrible delay with penicillin caused people to die needlessly. So I put together just a few of these slides to introduce Dr. Lustgarten, because he's going to tell you about some ways that you can slow your rate of aging right now. And that's important, because these breakthroughs about reversing aging, if we don't stay healthy today, we may be missing the longevity boat. In other words, we may die before those technologies become available. And again, I look at the failure that goes on today where we believe there are technologies available that are not being utilized in clinical medical practice. That's scary, to think that something that could save your life, it's in a published medical journal and the doctors aren't paying attention to it. They ignore penicillin for way too long. Somebody should have moved that ahead a lot further. It took World War II. And this slide, by the way, should really startle you. And that's the fact that it really wasn't Alexander Fleming in 1928 who accidentally discovered that mold could kill bacteria. Some of the most famous scientists in the world had stumbled across this. They had identified centuries ago that there were antibiotics that could cure bacterial illness. And this slide, I'll leave it up there for a little bit, because you go back in history there to 1640 and 1870, 1871, you've got some of the most brilliant people who could have moved that forward, but they may have lacked funding. They may have lacked a partnership. And part of the reason this church is put together is to bring like-minded individuals together so that we can talk about medical breakthroughs that are published in journals and how we may be able to utilize those ourselves. Because I don't want to be a victim of medical ignorance, and that's the leading cause of death in today's world, medical ignorance. So again, no more penicillin delays. That is the mission that this church has, and it's just a matter of connecting the dots, bringing the scientists together with the people who can develop, people who can take science and move it to the next step. If we can connect the dots, we are going to live a real long time, and we're going to fulfill Nikolai Fedorov's prediction that mankind will overcome aging and death. There's an absolute urgent need to fund age reversal research. My work 7 days a week focuses on finding ways to accelerate age reversal research so that we don't have the problem that we do right now, which is too many people dying prematurely. So I want to introduce a doctor who's trying to keep people alive, and he's combating the medical ignorance that pervades conventional practice today. You go into a doctor's office and you'll get some good high-tech drugs in some cases, but there's always something that is overlooked. I've never talked to a patient who's not missing something that could further benefit their individual state of health. Cancer patients we talk about, aspirin, metformin, cimetidine. Those are 3 drugs that have been around for a long time that all have anti-cancer properties. And I've yet to hear a cancer patient tell me their oncologist recommended any one of them. There are thousands of studies that validate aspirin, metformin, and cimetidine as highly effective against most forms of cancer. And there are websites right now, you can go into Google, type in cimetidine and cancer, metformin and cancer, aspirin and cancer, and you'll read hundreds of studies validating their efficacy. And yet the oncology community pretends like they don't even exist. They pretend like the research doesn't exist. They pretend like the science is not there to validate their patients using them. When someone calls me, I tell them, go down to CVS or Walgreens and buy your cimetidine and your aspirin over the counter. Metformin requires a prescription. Just do what you should be doing based on the peer-reviewed published literature. Don't let that disease just destroy you when that evidence is sitting there. So Dr. Lustgarten, I want to have you come up and tell this audience, tell this congregation what they should be doing right now to delay this horrific aging process.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thank you. All right, let me get set up here. Let's see.
Right, so I have no interest in getting older. And it's not just an interest, I have a plan on how to slow it down as best I can. So today I'm going to show you a broad overview, and hopefully it can help people get healthier and get them to live longer. So this is my approach to optimal health and lifespan, and there are three main aspects of it: calorie restriction, tracking my nutrition every day, and regular blood testing. So once upon a time, the focus in health and fitness was a whole food diet and exercise, and this is best exemplified by the godfather of fitness, Jack LaLanne. So this is Jack in his 40s, Jack at 70, and Jack at 95. And I should say that Jack's, one of his mottos was, he couldn't die, it would be bad for his image. Well, unfortunately, he died at 96. So can optimizing health and longevity be made more specific just in this general, eat real food and exercise approach? So with that in mind, President Obama last year announced $215 million in extra funding for this thing called precision medicine genetic plan. And what does that involve? So if you get full genome sequencing, each of us has a full genome. If you do that in very large data sets, and then look at outcomes such as heart disease, cancer, cognition, physical function, et cetera, and then you investigate associations between the DNA and these outcomes, you can start to have more precise, targeted interventions that'll reduce disease risk and improve health and lifespan. Well, that sounds great. I'm all for that. So when will it be here? So this is the cost per individual genome. And when the human genome was first sequenced in 2001, you can see the cost just for one human genome, $100 million. You can't have a very large study with $100 million per subject. So luckily for us, the cost of just the individual human genome has dramatically dropped over the last 15 or so years, as to where the price now is about $1,000 per person. Now, that may not seem like a lot, but it is, because to have adequate statistical power for scientific studies, you need very large data sets. So a study with 10,000 people times $1,000 a genome is a $10 million study. This is a rare thing, costs too much money. So from this, actionable recommendations based on these large genomic-focused studies, it's at least 5 years away, maybe even 50 years away. So what can we do until then to optimize our health? So my strategy is to minimize disease risk and to maximize health and longevity based on data from large epidemiological studies. So studies that have a very large amount of people that have adequate statistical power to make some kind of association in terms of how we can best improve health. So there are three main aspects to my approach. One is to achieve optimal body weight. Two is to track my nutrition and optimize it every day. And this is, you can't really see it here, but I'm going to show it bigger in a few slides. This is everything I track: carbohydrates, fats, protein, the big macronutrients, but also all the vitamins, including each of the vitamin A's, all the minerals. And then the third part of my approach for optimal health is regular blood testing and optimizing that. Now, it isn't just these things in isolation. It's getting my blood test data, and then because I'm measuring my nutrients every day, I can then further optimize my blood because I'm studying them both at the same time. So first, in terms of body weight, what's optimal? So in probably one of the biggest studies ever investigated, this is a meta-analysis of 230 studies that included 30 million adults. This is as big as it gets for scientific studies. And in healthy never smokers, this is risk of death from all causes plotted against BMI, which is your body weight divided by your height in meters squared. And what you can see is that the lowest risk, which is down here, it's a BMI between 20 to 25. So if your BMI is between that range, your risk of death from all causes, heart disease, cancer, everything you can think of is at its lowest level. So, okay, 20 to 23 is optimal for reduced disease risk. Now, this data, even though it's 230 different studies, generally is in 40, 50, 60, up to about 80 years old. Now, I care about living longer than that. I want to get well over into the hundreds. So what does the data look like for BMI and risk of death from all causes in centenarians, people who live longer than 100? So I collected as much data as I can find, and these are 11 different studies in people who are 100 years or older, and in some more than 1,000 subjects, and their BMI. And by looking at the total BMI, the average BMI in someone older than 100 is right there in that range too, 22. So the data in younger subjects, 20 to 23 BMI, the data in people who live older than 100, 22. So based on this, I'd say a BMI close to 22 may be optimal for longevity. So now, I've always had this goal of getting into optimal physical condition, and so what you see here is a plot of my body weight over time, and I've been actually tracking my body weight for about a year and a half. Each data point is an individual measurement, so I've measured my body weight that many times over a year and a half. So I didn't always make progress to get my body weight going in the right direction. In 2013, I had my BMI was 25.1, and based on the data I showed before, it was way too high. It should be between 20 and 23. And I had my body fat measured, 15%, relatively lean, not too bad. But it's still too heavy in terms of the risk of death from all causes data I just showed. So for about a year, you can see the data starts in 2014. I didn't really make any progress, even though I was trying everything I could, ballparking my calories, obviously exercise. I couldn't get it to go down. But then I figured out that I'll pick a calorie amount and just stick to that and just try to eat around that every day. So I did that, and that got me a nice little slow decrease in body weight for 4 or 5 months, and then hit a plateau. And this happens to everybody. And then they give up and they go back in the wrong direction. Luckily, that didn't happen. I decided to get more specific. So here I started tracking my macronutrients, protein, calories, fat, fiber, etc., and micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, and other things like that. And once I started tracking that and getting more specific about my health, you can see very nice decrease. And I haven't been this light since high school. And then I hit a plateau where I'm trying to stay around here. But also, just to make sure I wasn't losing weight too fast, I had my body fat measured using this technology called DEXA. And my body fat was about 12%, still relatively lean, so I didn't lose too much muscle, but I also lost fat. BMI getting closer to that 22 range. And then down here, I'm within the 20 to 23. So that's my year and a half progression to get to an optimal body weight. And from that, I can conclude that based on BMI, my risk for all-cause mortality is now within the optimal range. So how was I able to slowly reduce my body weight? Now, as I mentioned, in this arrow here, I started tracking my nutrition. So essential for me to do that is using a food scale. Just the general ballparking my calories, it didn't work. I have to literally measure everything, and I actually enjoy it as much as it may sound terrible to have to weigh all your food, but I actually enjoy it. So once I use the food scale, then I can most accurately track my calories. And it's very simple. If you eat less calories than your body needs, you're going to lose some weight. So this is a plot of my calorie intake over time, and this is almost a full year of data, 300 plus days of calorie intake. So in the beginning, you can see it's very scattered. I didn't know what calorie amounts to stick to, so I just picked 2,400. And then once I picked 2,400, I figured, well, on days I exercise, I should add a little more to maximize muscle mass and all that. And on days I don't exercise, to eat a little less. So that's what we see here. These are the exercise days, eat a little more, and the non-exercise, eat a little less. Now, what you should also point out is these data points up here, 6,000, 6,000, 5,000. I'm not perfect. I love to eat. Everybody loves to eat. So these are days where I just felt like eating. To balance it out, though, I ate a little less the next day for a few days. So yeah. So that's what I did in terms of counting my calories. Now, by using the food scale, it wasn't only tracking my calories, I was able to track my nutrients. And I did that with an online tracking software that allowed me to measure all this. Now, the hypothesis is that if I track my nutrition every day, my risk of deficiency-induced disease should be at its lowest level. Imagine if you went 20, 30, 40 years not getting enough calcium and vitamin D and you end up with osteoporosis. I don't want to end up like that. So by knowing every single day that I'm covering all my nutrients, my risk of deficiency-induced disease should be at its lowest level. And as I mentioned earlier, this is everything I literally track: carbohydrate intake, fiber, starch, individual sugars, because too much fructose can do bad things to your liver, all the different fats, including monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, the omega-3s, omega-6s, protein, all the vitamins and minerals. Now, the first thing you should think when you see this data is, what amounts should I shoot for? You know, where are you getting the numbers to shoot for in terms of your daily nutrition? So the RDA is pretty well established in giving general nutrient recommendations for how much we should be eating every day. But who really sticks to that? Most people just eat. They couldn't care less about the RDA. They're just trying to eat for taste. So, but the RDA may not be optimal in terms of reducing risk of disease from all causes. The RDA is basically to prevent disease or to make sure you're not too super high toxic, dietary toxicity. So the RDA may not be optimal, and I'm going to show you 4 examples where that may not be true, and taking more than what the RDA is proposing may be best for optimal health. One of those is vitamin K. You can see here my vitamin K intake on this day is 1,600 micrograms. The RDA, or an adequate intake, is only 100, and I'm going to talk about why that is. Potassium, another example I'm going to show you. My potassium intake is almost 9,000 milligrams a day. The average American diet takes in 2,600 milligrams a day, and I'm going to show you why my intake is dramatically higher there. My fiber intake is almost triple what's recommended. My fiber intake here on this day is 96 grams. I've taken way more than the RDA there. And then how much protein should we eat? So these are just more examples, a few examples. I have a lot more than those 4. For example, how much omega-6, how much vitamin C, vitamin D, and selenium. And if you're interested, on my blog, it's a free blog, you can see why I take in way more than the RDA for those nutrients. So first, vitamin K. I mentioned I take in way more than the RDA. So the RDA, or the adequate intake for vitamin K, is 90 micrograms a day for females and 120 micrograms a day for males. So are those values optimal for reduced risk of death from all causes, ACM risk? And maybe not. So what we see here is a plot of all-cause mortality, risk of death from all causes, and patients were followed up. So they came back, they came in the beginning and they came back 5 years later, or didn't, maybe they died. So what we can see is that for people who ate less than 626 micrograms a day, and this is in 3 different groups, compared with people who ate more than 626 micrograms of vitamin K a day, basically this group had half the risk of death from all causes than the lower vitamin K group, even though they were eating 6 times greater than the RDA. So that's the first bit of data that suggests eating way more vitamin K than the RDA is optimal for health. Now second, there's a protein known as osteocalcin, and it needs vitamin K to have optimal activity. The osteocalcin is produced by bone that has important effects on the pancreas and insulin secretion. It has important effects on muscle, liver, and fat, on insulin sensitivity and energy expenditure, and on testosterone production. These are all things I care about in aging, so it's important. Now, it's been shown that 1,000 micrograms of vitamin K is needed for maximal osteocalcin activity. So from these 2 bits of data, we can conclude that eating at least 1,000 micrograms of vitamin K, 10 times the RDA, may be optimal for reducing risk of death from all causes. So what's my average vitamin K intake? So I've highlighted here the AI, and that's about 100. And this is a scatter, again, almost a full year of data, a full year of tracking my nutrition every single day. And before I show you my average, I just want to point out that in the beginning, I wasn't as good as I was later on. So just by tracking your nutrition, you will get better at getting full nutrient coverage. So my average vitamin K intake is more than 1,000 micrograms a day, as is suggested on the previous slide, 1,404 micrograms a day. So based on that data, my osteocalcin activity should be maximal. My risk for death from all-cause mortality should be low. Now, if the RDA for vitamin K is suboptimal, are the values for other micro and macronutrients also suboptimal? And another good example of that is potassium, daily potassium intake, dietary potassium intake. So as I mentioned earlier, the average potassium intake in the United States is 2,600 micrograms a day, with only 1 in 100. For every 100 people, only 1 is getting more than 4,700 micrograms a day. So if I want to look at a very large, well-powered study of 10,000 people, that's 100 people that would have a potassium intake greater than 4,700. So if I'm going to eat a high potassium diet, there's no data to tell me what's best for health. If I'm around 2,600, there's a lot of data, but for eating way more than the RDA, there's no data. So I need to have a better system for identifying what's optimal for health when it comes to potassium intake. So we evolved eating way more potassium than these paltry amounts. So what we can see is each line here corresponds to a different pre-agricultural diet. So these are 159 different diets, and then how much potassium did they take in? So the average value of these 159 diets basically is 3 million years of evolution, potassium intake. So what we can see is that the average potassium intake that we evolved eating was very high, 400 milliEQs per day. And if you translate that into milligrams per day, it's 15,000 milligrams of potassium per day on a 3,000 calorie diet. That's almost 6 times higher than the average American eats. So is that amount optimal for health? There's no data in large epi studies, so I've got to figure out a way to determine what's optimal for potassium. So is a dietary potassium intake of greater than 10,000 milligrams per day optimal for health? So the way I look at this data is potassium intake is a component of this thing known as potential renal acid load. That's a measure of the effect of food on how much acid or base that the kidney deals with. So why is that important? So if you eat a lot of dietary potassium, your potential renal acid load will be low. I'm going to show you why that's important. So what we can see here is that PRAL plotted against a biomarker known as serum bicarbonate. So if you eat a very high potassium diet, your potential renal acid load will be way over here. And that should correspond to a bicarbonate that's very basic up here. Now in contrast, the average just based on the average United States potassium intake, that would yield the serum bicarbonate of about 26, and actually even a little bit lower. So why is that important? If you look at the association between bicarbonate, serum bicarbonate, with risk of death from all causes, we can see, well, evidence from several studies suggests that increased butyrate is optimal for lifespan. And we see that because butyrate increases lifespan in flies, and it's involved in mechanisms that increase lifespan in mice. For example, FGF21 overexpression increases lifespan in mice. Butyrate increases FGF21 expression. Acarbo supplementation increases lifespan in mice. Serum butyrate is increased by acarbo supplementation. Unfortunately, butyrate-producing bacteria are decreased in older adults. This is the population that would need butyrate the most. So how can we increase butyrate production? Increase dietary fiber. That's how we do it. And it's elegantly illustrated by this slide here. So this is a plot of dietary fiber intake, 25 grams, 45 grams, 149 grams, and fecal butyrate, how much butyrate your intestinal bacteria have produced. And it's almost perfectly linear. In the low fiber group, 2.3 millimoles per day. If you double the fiber, you more than double, approximately more than double the butyrate. And if you six-fold increase in fiber to there, you get about a six-fold increase in butyrate levels. So eat more fiber, may be good for lifespan. So how much is my fiber intake? So again, this is a full year of data each day for 365 days, my daily fiber intake. And if the clicker would go. So there's the US intake, 10 to 20 grams. Hang on, where should I be pointing? Back there, all right. There's the recommended US intake, 20 to 30 grams. And then you can see mine is way above both of them on 100 grams. So based on my high fiber intake, my intestinal butyrate-producing bacteria should be maximized. And I'm a scientist. I want to make sure that they are. I don't just want to, maybe it's working. I want to see that they are. So with that in mind, I sent my poo to this company known as Ubiome. And they measured the amount of bacteria in my intestines, all of them, or as much as they could measure. Now, once I got that data back, I deciphered it to see if I had a lot of these butyrate-producing bacteria. So let's see what the data shows. So what I found was that several butyrate-producing bacterial taxa are increased compared to Ubiome's cohort. So basically what I did was they have hundreds and thousands of people who send them poo samples. Now, if I compare my samples against them with the hypothesis that my butyrate production should be way higher than theirs, that's what I would expect to see. Because I don't imagine most people have 100 grams of fiber per day. So if everybody's eating 50 grams of fiber, their butyrate-producing bacteria will be less. Mine should be more. That's the hypothesis. Let's see. So to know something about butyrate, one of the main pathways for its production is by combining acetyl-CoA into butyrate, and that'll be important in a minute. So what do we see in my poo? Basically, my hypothesis is true. Each of these bacteria, all 6, were way up, some of them 2.5, 3-fold, and they each make butyrate, and the reference for that they each make butyrate is found here. Now, what's also interesting is that, as I mentioned, acetyl-CoA is used to make butyrate by some intestinal bacteria, and my acetate producers were also way up. Look, this bacteria here, Marvin Briantia, 11-fold. And why that's important is, if this is up 11-fold, that means acetyl-CoA is up 11-fold. That means my butyrate levels should be up half that, because it takes 2 of these to make 1 of those. So my high fiber, based on this data and Ubiome's data, 100 grams of fiber seems to be doing a really good job of boosting my butyrate and acetate producing bacteria. So I've shown you 3 examples of how the RDA may not be optimal for health. How much protein should I eat? And that's a debatable issue because it's everywhere. Nobody knows the answer. So here we see death from all causes risk versus low protein, moderate protein, and a high protein diet. And what we can see is that as protein intake increases, risk of death from all causes increases. However, in a separate large epidemiological study that looked at death from all causes risk versus protein intake, we can see that high protein is not associated with risk of death from all causes. In fact, the opposite is true. If you eat too little protein, that's bad for health. So I hope I've confused you. Yeah, because science journalists do this all the time. They'll report something, and then another science journalist will report the opposite thing, and we're all like, what are we supposed to believe? So to further investigate this, we need to understand a little bit about biochemistry. How would we know if dietary protein intake is too low or too high? So what happens when your body eats more protein than it needs? Now, protein is made up of amino acids, and this is an example of one of them here known as methionine. Now, what's special about proteins is that they have this thing called an amino group, NH2. And when protein and amino acids are in excess, those amino groups enter the liver, where they enter the urea cycle, and they make urea, that molecule here. Now, this plot here just shows that as your nitrogen intake, which is almost exclusively coming from protein, as that increases, your urea production increases almost perfectly. So if you eat a very high protein diet, your urea production will be high, and your circulating levels of this metabolite, blood urea nitrogen, will also be high. So it's a way to use blood testing to figure out how much protein you should eat. So what's the data for blood urea nitrogen and risk of death from all causes? Now, the reference range, just going back to that point about the reference range not being optimal for risk of death from all causes, for example, for this, the range is 6 to 20. Now, what you should see is that not all risk is the same. Not all values are the same. For someone that has a value of 15, their risk is 0.5, meaning they have 50% less risk of death from all causes compared to someone who's still within the range at 20. And this study was more than 1 million adults, so it's a very large study, adequately powered. So what's my bond? Hopefully less than 15, not 20. So I've measured my biochemistry, and this is just a simple blood test. It's as easy as the $30 copay that you get when you go to the doctor. These aren't any special tests. You would get it on something known as the standard chemistry screen. So these are my values. I've measured basically about once a year for the last 10 years, this and other stuff. And in the beginning, I was on a classic bodybuilder diet, whey protein, protein bars, all the stuff you see in magazines like an idiot. And I say that because that put my blood urea nitrogen values higher than this 15 cutoff that, in my opinion, and based on the evidence, should be optimal for reduced risk of death from all causes. So since I've educated myself, I've reduced my protein intake. But then I thought if my protein intake is too low, it won't be optimal for muscle mass. Muscle mass is important for insulin sensitivity and function and functional independence. So I've been playing with my dietary protein intake to try to find that value that's good for my biochemistry and also good for my overall health. So that number that I've settled on is around 84 grams a day. That's about 14% of total calories. And based on the blood urea nitrogen data, it may be optimal for reduced risk of death from all causes. So that takes me into the third prong of my approach to optimal health using blood testing. And it looks like a lot of data, don't worry. I'm not going to show you everything. This is a small snapshot of all the stuff I measure. I've been measuring it for 10 years or so. And I keep it in a spreadsheet like this. And, where's the reference range? Your MD will tell you, your GP, your doctor will tell you if you're too high or you're too low, and then only will intervene. But what if your value was at 4 and then 6 and then 8 and then 10? You had this 5-year, 10-year trend of a given biomarker getting worse. Technically, your risk is dramatically increasing. So I like to measure these things before they become a problem. And actually, once I see a problem in my circulating biochemistry, I change it right away. I'm not going to wait 10, 15 years for disease to happen and then, then I'll change it. No, I'm not doing that. So I'm just going to show you a few examples of how I've done that. So I started to get more serious about the tracking my biochemistry in 2012. And then I thought I'll try different diets. So I figured, why not go fruitarian? I love fruit. So I'm just going to eat almost nothing but fruit. So what did this do to my biochemistry? So some things got better. CO2 is that serum bicarbonate that I showed a few slides earlier, and that's one marker of acid-base balance that should be higher, I'd say, than 30 or so, 31. And as you can see, going fruitarian was good for me. That sent my serum bicarbonate in the right direction. There you can see that 31 would put me at the lowest risk compared to lower values, which are higher risk. But what about triglycerides? Fructose, found in fruit sugar, is well known to increase triglycerides. And it actually did that in me, even though I was eating fruit, healthy food. So this is risk of death from all causes for triglycerides, you can see there. And the 1 corresponds to the 1 millimolar, corresponds to about 90 milligrams per deciliter. So, okay, I'm at 89. It looks like I'm at low risk, so I shouldn't worry. But I should be comparing me against me, not me against the reference population. And what you can see is that my triglycerides more than doubled going fruitarian. Going in the wrong direction, you could argue, right? So some things good on a fruitarian diet, and other things not so good. Another example, very low density cholesterol. This increases with age, and it sent me on the aging trajectory for very low density cholesterol. Similarly, white blood cells going in the wrong direction from 4.4 and 4.6 to 5.7. These are not good things to go in those directions. So I decided to fine tune that, and there's so much data on vegans, and there's so much pop culture science about vegans being super healthy. Why not? Give it a shot. So in 2013, for a full year, I tried a whole grain heavy vegan. And what that means is most of my calories came from whole grains every day, 100 to 150 grams a day. Lots of fruits and veggies, lots of fruits and veggies, but not as much as now, and almost no animal products. I cut all the animal products out, fish, meat, whatever. Dairy too, almost completely. So what effect did this have on my biomarkers? So whereas going fruitarian was good for my circulating markers of acid-base balance, have a look now, 23. Now I'm at high risk in terms of bicarbonate as a marker of risk of death from all causes. Triglycerides still elevated, didn't do anything to bring them down. HDL, the good cholesterol, went in the wrong direction. Look at that, 28. Anything less than 40 is considered bad for health. My very low density cholesterol stayed elevated at 18. and my white blood cells are now going in the wrong direction. So both these diets, I'd argue, are not optimal for my health. So then I started to do more research. And one of the longest lived societies in the world are the Okinawans. And the base of their food pyramid is not whole grains, it's vegetables. So I decided to look into the data. Are vegetables optimal? Should I be eating a ton more vegetables? Not one piece of broccoli, but maybe a whole head of broccoli, or 2 or 3. So I decided to compare the nutrient density of various green vegetables versus whole grains. So that's what we have here: broccoli, spinach, romaine lettuce, which is generally thought to be nutrient poor, but we're going to see that it's not, compared against barley, whole wheat spaghetti, and oats. Now, the calories are the same. So you can't say that one or the other has better nutrition, because this is for having the same amount of calories. So let's start with protein. Well, nobody really thinks of green vegetables having lots of protein, but have a look. Broccoli, spinach, and romaine lettuce, for the same amount of calories, they crush whole grains for protein. It's not even close. And then the other one I want to point out, and I talked about the importance of fiber earlier, have a look at how much fiber you'd get. I mean, it's more than triple what you would get in whole grains. So this is strike one for whole grains in my book. So then what about, maybe whole grains are better in terms of minerals. Maybe that's why they're promoted more heavily over vegetables. So if you look at every single mineral on this list, comparing the green veggies versus whole grains lose every time. I mean, with the exception of selenium. You can see there's very little selenium in the green veggies, and there's slightly more in whole grains, but I don't eat whole grains to get my selenium. You can get that very easily in Brazil nuts. 1 Brazil nut a day, you're good. You don't have 1 or 2. So in terms of vitamin density, veggies, again, king over whole grains. So maybe whole grains are better in terms of mineral content. Maybe that's why they're more heavily promoted. So let's have a look. They lose too. They lose there too. In terms of vitamin content, vitamin C, folate, vitamin A, vitamin K, vitamin E, it's not even close. It's whole grains get crushed here, literally. So per calorie, vegetables are also more vitamin dense than whole grains. So with this in mind, in April 2015, I switched to a vegetable-dominant nutritional approach. The majority of my calories would come from vegetables. I would also eat fruit, but not too much. Fish every day, because that had a positive effect on my circulating biomarkers, but almost no animal products. I eat very little meat. Occasionally I eat dairy. And occasional, if at all, whole grains, less than 120 a week. I used to eat that in a day. So what did it do to my circulating biochemistry? So my markers of acid-base balance, CO2 and ion gap, remember anything greater than 31 here was the best for health? Right direction. Triglycerides, look at that. I'm back to where I was 5 years earlier. Cut it back in half. How about my white blood cells? 4.4, going in the right direction. So I just wanted to highlight the white blood cells here, because this is survival for various white blood cell counts. Now, the reference range for white blood cells is 6 to 10. So if your value is 8, you would think, oh, I'm fine, I'm in the range. Or if my value is 7, I'm fine, I'm in the range. But that may not be true. So this is a longitudinal study, the Baltimore Longitudinal Study in Aging. And long story short is people around 50 years old came in for up to 40 years of measurements. So this is people compared against themselves over time, not compared against a different group. And the group that had the best survival was actually this range here, 3.5 to 6. And I'm highlighting that because fruitarian and vegan were sending me towards 6, and maybe even beyond that if I didn't stop it sooner rather than later. Going whole, to a vegetable dominant pattern now gets me to about the midpoint of that 3.5 to 6. Now, in terms of survival, they survive the best. Now, if you go too low on your white blood cells, they survive the worst. And having the high end of the range, 6 to 10, well, they're even worse than that. So what I wanted to point out here, though, is how much extra life can having your white blood cells in the right amount be? So when you look at that, you want to look at average survival and then bring it across. So someone with a 3.5 to 6 white blood cell count lived about 35 years past the baseline. In contrast, someone who had very low white blood cells, they lived 15 years shorter. That's a big deal to me, 15 years. And even having slightly elevated within the reference range, 6 to 10, they're living about 10 years shorter. So this is, for me, 10 to 15 years to optimize your white blood cell counts. I mean, that's huge data. It's very strong data in my eyes. Now, so what about cholesterol? I've shown you some. Off to a good start with the vegetable dominant pattern. What about cholesterol? So in young adults, less than 60, low cholesterol is good for health. If your values are less than 160 total, that's LDL, HDL, everything, that's actually associated with the best health. But as the data in older adults is actually the opposite. If your total cholesterol values are less than 160, you're at higher risk. If it's higher than 240, you're actually in the less risk of death from all causes. At least that's what we're shown, and I'm going to explain why that is in a minute. So this is representative of data in the older adults. Survival plotted versus time. And the group that had the best survival had the lowest total cholesterol, compared with the people who had values less than 160, who had worse survival. So what's my total cholesterol? Well, in every case since 2006, I'm less than 160. So am I supposed to eat a less healthy diet to get my data so that it agrees with the published literature? Should I eat terribly, get my cholesterol up to 240? Right? It doesn't make sense. So to further investigate that, we've got to look at a few other biomarkers. So including albumin and HDL may better assess the association between total cholesterol with all-cause mortality risk. And we can see that here. So this is risk of death from all causes. And then in people who had low cholesterol, less than 160, what are their albumin and HDL levels? So if the albumin and HDL are higher than 38 and 47, those people had the least risk of death from all causes, compared to someone who had low albumin and low HDL cholesterol. So the first obvious question should be, what's my albumin? Because my low cholesterol is putting me at increased risk. So albumin wasn't up here, but here it is. And in every case, for 10 or so measurements over the last 10 years, I'm above this 38 threshold. So far, so good. So what about my HDL? Well, for the last 5 years or so, it's going in the wrong direction, and it's too low. 35 is less than this 47 cutoff to put me in the lowest risk for death from all causes risk. So I didn't like that, and I didn't wait 10 or 15 years to fix it. So what did I do to potentially try to improve it? So this is a plot of my HDL values over time. And just to recap and remind, that's when I went fruitarian. That's when I went whole grain dominant vegan. You can see my HDL levels went down going whole grain vegan, not good. And then adding fish back in slightly brought it back up to 35. And then on my last measurement, I got it up to 53. Now, how did I do that? So I basically reduced my carbohydrate intake, and I added about 300 calories from nuts, increasing my fat intake just a little. And where does that 53 put me in terms of that cholesterol chart that I showed before? Come up. There we go. So remember, I needed a value more than 47, so now I'm at 53, and so that should put me at lowest risk. So now, even though it looked like my low cholesterol would put me at increased risk of death from all causes, including albumin and HDL, a more comprehensive story, my risk of death from all causes should be maximally low. So I'm not perfect. My data is not perfect, and there's some things that I need to work on. These are my liver enzymes, AST and ALT. So what's optimal? So these are data in more than 1 million subjects for AST and ALT. And the lowest part of the chart is lowest risk of death from all causes. And I know I'm saying that 1 million times, but it's important to me. So what you can see is the lowest point on these two charts, about 15 and somewhere around 15 here, is that for liver enzymes, about 15 to 20 may be optimal. Well, mine are probably double that. So, and it's been like that for 5 years or so. They're going in the wrong direction. So my liver enzymes aren't optimal. So can it be improved? So what am I doing to improve that? So these two are plotted, AST and ALT. I've plotted them over time. Now, high fructose diets can increase liver enzymes. I mentioned that earlier when I went fruitarian. So the first hypothesis I had was I'm going to cut down my fructose intake. I actually cut my fruit intake down a little bit. I don't get fructose from anywhere else. I don't drink sodas or candy, eat candy. It would only come from fruit. So I tried reducing my fruit intake just a little bit. And because I track my daily nutrition, I'm able to be very precise with these measurements. So I reduced it from about 16% of my total calories to 13%. That's about 200 calories less fruit sugar per day. So what did it do? What did it do to my liver enzymes? It didn't change it. If anything, you could argue it went up a little bit. So it isn't my fruit sugar that's making these things worse. So what am I going to do next? So I drink a lot of green tea, and high doses of the antioxidant EGCG found in green tea has been shown to induce liver cell damage, and that may explain the high levels of these liver proteins in my blood. So right now I've reduced my green tea intake from 6 to 4 cups a day, and I'm going to retest. And there's some other stuff that I've done that I haven't included here. Like, for example, my gut microbiome showed pesticides in my pesticide degradation. So I've actually bought a new water filter thinking that the pesticides in my water may be increasing my liver cell damage. So, but I'm hot on the case. I'm going to get this thing figured out sooner rather than later. So once upon a time, the mantra was to eat real food and exercise. But what if Jack tracked his nutrition and biochemistry? Would he have lived longer? And I'd say yes. So with that in mind, I track my daily nutrition and I track my biochemistry. And then I use the two to optimize both with the goal of maximizing my health and optimizing my lifespan. But there are higher levels, and I showed a little bit of that. We can add the microbiome, which I showed a little bit of data today. I just started measuring that, so I've got decades of fun with that. And then we can also add the genome. And once I've got all this data, I think I'll really have my, my physique supercharged for a long life. And that's it. Thanks for your attention. And one last thing, I have a book that I've just written, Infectious Burden as the Cause of Age and Age-Related Disease and What We Can Do to Fight Back. So check it out. Yeah. Sure.
Questions? Lots of questions.
What do you do for exercise?
Right. So strength training, flexibility training, 3 times a week, strength and flexibility training. I try to be functional, have functional movements. But yeah, exercise in terms of strength training. I walk 15 to 20 miles a week for my cardio because long-lived societies aren't running marathons. It's recreational physical activity, so you don't have to kill yourself with exercise. But
How about weightlifting?
yeah, I do strength training. I got a little bit. But yeah, it's important. It's important for muscle mass. So yeah, it's very important.
So we're live streaming this. If I can get the questions on the microphone. John?
Sure.
Yes, my question is, what fish do you feel is best based on your experience?
For me with fish, low mercury is obviously an issue. I'm a little lazy with it. I eat a can of sardines every day, and you could argue probably the aluminum in there is going to get me, but it's, do I want to cook 4 ounces, 3.5 ounces every single day, or just peel it out of a can? So that's my one lazy vice, is eating sardines. The reason it's sardines is because their omega-3s are amongst the highest of the fish, similar to salmon, for about the same price. So that's what I do for fish.
Yes. Can you tell us with regard to the booty rate and the protein and how do you get that much through your diet?
The butyrate or?
The butyrate, the protein, and the potassium in particular.
Right. So, for example, high potassium food is commonly, we're commonly told it's bananas. Well, if it's going to sound crazy, but if you eat a whole head of lettuce, you get 1,000 milligrams of potassium. If you eat a whole head of broccoli, or actually a couple pounds of broccoli, you'll get 4,000 milligrams of potassium. So when I eat vegetables, I don't just eat a little bit. I'm eating very large sums of vegetables. And that's, the vegetables aren't just high potassium, that's also where I'm getting the majority of the fiber. If I had an equivalent amount of whole grains, the potassium would be much, much less. Actually, as I showed, the vitamin, nutrient, and mineral contents would be much, much less. So for maximal nutrient density, whether it's fiber, potassium, veggies, I mean, that's the way to go, right? That's how I do it. Protein, so about 20 grams come from the fish, but as I also showed, just the green veggies like broccoli, spinach, romaine lettuce, they've got 10 grams or so of protein per 100 calories. Mushrooms, too, another great source of protein. But I don't just have 1 or 2 mushrooms. I eat the whole container. It's a pound of mushrooms. So, but when you think of it from the evolutionary point of view, we evolved eating like that. And then once we figured out how to make whole grains, and it was an easy energy source, who wants to chew on plants all day? But the fact is our DNA saw basically eating nothing, almost nothing but plants, some meat, for millions of years. And our DNA is still living in that mindset. So for me, whole grain's minimal, not eliminated, but minimal.
Do you meal prep and do you buy in bulk?
I do a little bit of meal prep, but it isn't the standard, chicken and broccoli stuff. I have like certain meals that I like to make in a certain way, so I guess that's technically meal prep. For sure, I buy in bulk. When I go to Costco, I buy. Right, but I buy like frozen berries at Costco in bulk. But yeah, I do weigh how much of it I eat. But yeah, I buy like 40 pounds of frozen berries at a time, like for the month. Yeah, it saves money. It's super expensive. That's one of the drawbacks of eating the way I do. I mean, vegetables are I think the reason that they're so expensive is because they're the most nutrition. And if it was actually flipped where they were the cheapest, we'd all have far superior improved health. So, a bag of barley is super cheap. I mean, what are we going to buy, right? So.
Do you limit yourself to organic foods and non-GMOs?
Right, yeah. I do. I try to eat as organic as possible with everything. There's some things that I can't, unfortunately, like it's very hard to find mushrooms that are organic. So I don't have a choice there. And cherry tomatoes, it's very hard to get them at a good price. Not organic, but almost exclusively organic. And I do tend to stay away from GMOs, and that's a hot topic issue because there are a lot of scientists who are pro-GMO. I'm not one of them. There just isn't, for me, there isn't longitudinal data in terms of the health effects. Most of these studies are very short duration, showing no effect, if anything. And once upon a time, cigarettes were thought to be healthy, right? And then decades of research, and right, it's pretty obvious now. So yeah, I stay away from GMOs.
So I have a question, maybe three. Do you steam your vegetables, and do you eat salads, and do you eat quinoa, which has 8 grams of protein and 9 essential amino acids, which is the perfect food?
Okay, so do I steam? I boil my stuff. It takes 5 minutes to boil, and then it's in the water for 5 minutes. So it's a little bit more than steamed. For me, I can't eat raw broccoli. I like it a little bit cooked. But then I drink the water. I'm not dumping the water. It's a balance between taste, palpability, and I just can't eat it steamed. It's too crunchy. I don't like it. Salads, I eat giant salads. These aren't little dainty salads. These are 2-3 pound salads. Neil can attest. We went grocery shopping. It's like an appetizer. 16 ounces of mushrooms, a pound of carrots, 2 red peppers. I mean, I'm eating the whole red pepper like an apple, like a gorilla. So yeah, giant salads. But I make my own salad dressing. I don't buy this stuff that's in the store. I have a blender. I'll put like sesame seeds, lemon, fresh ginger, garlic, raw garlic. I'll blend it up, so I'll make my own salad dressings to keep the calories at a good level. And then in terms of quinoa, so as I showed, quinoa is similar to the other whole grain patterns. Sure, it has 8 grams of protein, but that's 160 calories. I could get almost double the protein from eating broccoli for the same amount of calories, and way more nutrients, vitamins and minerals, protein, fiber, than quinoa and other whole grains. So for me, quinoa and whole grains aren't a no, but it's minimal. It doesn't fill me up either. Like I could eat 1,000 calories of whole grains, and then I still want to go and eat more. Whereas if I've eaten a 2 or 3 pound big veggie meal, my belly is so full, I just can't physically eat anymore. So that's what works for me.
As I approach 70, I'm very concerned about muscle mass and increasing muscle mass. I've done so for my whole life. I usually eat a lot of chicken, not a lot of vegetables. So what would you suggest now to increase the muscle mass at this point?
Right. So eating a lot of meat is acid forming in the body, and when you've got way too much acid in the body, that's known as metabolic acidosis. So why that is important is because that can decrease protein synthesis. Protein synthesis is how your muscle is made. So if you're very heavy on the meat and acid-forming stuff, actually whole grains are acid-forming too. Even nuts are acid-forming. You've got to balance it out with abundant veggies, and that shifts your body away from systemic acidosis towards the other way, a more alkaline state. In theory, that should maximally allow you to have protein synthesis as high as possible and to optimize muscle mass. So eat more veggies.
Here's a question here first.
What current diets most closely approximates your regimen?
I'd say vegetarian, but I do eat cheese occasionally, but very small amounts. I'm not opposed to eating meat, but I rarely do. For me, I don't like, because I've tried all the different, fruitarian, vegan, vegetarian, omnivore, I've tried it all. I don't like ascribing to one particular dietary philosophy. For me, it's all about the biomarkers. Maybe some people can eat a ton of meat and their circulating biomarkers would be great. Okay, that's what, for their genetics, that's what they can do. But for my genetics, this approach is what's best for me. But I don't want to deprive myself in terms of, whether it's, if I feel like eating a cheeseburger someday, maybe I will. I'm not opposed to that, but no junk. I don't want to mess with junk food. So.
And what's your view of the alkaline water, bottled water?
You're wasting your money. Yeah, your kidneys should do that job. Your kidneys will filter it out. Actually, veggies. If you're not eating veggies and you're drinking some water that's alkaline, okay, maybe it's beneficial. And maybe it'll affect your systemic alkalinity a little bit, but imagine if you were doing that and eating a ton of alkaline-forming vegetables, right? So eat more veggies, I'd say, is always the answer if you want to improve alkalinity in your body.
I had two questions. One about water, the water that you shower in, that you cook in. I wanted to know what you've learned as far as filtering. And then the other thing is fermented foods.
Right.
I don't think you touched on that tonight.
Yeah. Okay, so I didn't think about my water too much up until recently. So I did my graduate school work in Texas. I bought a zero water meter. You can measure the concentration of dissolved stuff in your water. In San Antonio, the concentration there was 320 parts per million of who knows what. So then when I moved up here, the tap water, the concentration here was like 80 parts per million. So basically, I thought Boston water is 4 times better than San Antonio. It has much less stuff dissolved in it. So I went along thinking that for as long as I've been in Boston, 6 years. And then when I got my gut microbiome sequenced, I actually have gut bacterial genes that are trying to break down pesticides. And one of those pesticides is called atrazine. That's a pesticide that's found in the water. So I don't know if it is coming from the water, but I looked online for all the filters, for all the water filters that could remove atrazine and a couple other things that are found in pesticide-related compounds. And so I bought something that would remove pesticides, and I'm going to retest my blood stuff in a few months. Now, in terms of fermented foods, in terms of the evolutionary approach, we ate fermented foods, but it wasn't a lot in high quantities. For example, if we didn't have food for a few days, and you saw some fruit, rotted fruit on the floor, fermented fruit, we would eat it, right? But but that would only be a rare thing, and probably in small amounts. So my take on fermented foods in small quantities, probably good. I actually tried. It's interesting. I added sauerkraut to my approach. Probably 100 grams, 3 ounces or less every day. And I didn't show it here, but my markers of acid-base balance in the body went the other way. And to make sauerkraut, you need lactic acid. So just that small amount of acid, I think, shifted my body towards acidity, systemic acidity. So I took that out, and I'm going to see how my stuff, my biomarkers look in a few months.
2 questions. First one is, olive oil seems to be very controversial, with Dr. Esselstyn saying no, no, no. Life Extension has several articles saying yes. My second question, though, is Dr. McDougall, like you, says vegetables, but he goes a step further and says starch-based potatoes and so on. Could you help me with either one of those?
Sure. In terms of olive oil, if I do use it, it's in very, very small amounts, 5 grams or less. It's too calorie dense. You're only getting fat, maybe some vitamin E. you're not getting much nutrition at all. And for me, it's I want to get as much nutrient-dense food as possible. How much can I get for the dollar if the dollar is my calories? So for me, very little, if ever, oils. Eat real food. That's my take on that. And McDougall, what was it on McDougall? It was
Vegetables,
right, starch. Sure. So the Okinawans, they eat a lot of purple potatoes, which is starch-based. So in older adults, in these centenarian studies that they live to 100 years or longer, they've got multiple nutrient deficiencies. So I wonder, and this is why I'll say more veggies, not necessarily the starchy veggies. How much better would centenarian health be if they didn't have multiple nutrient deficiencies? Now, if you eat a starch-based diet, a high starch-based diet, you won't get anywhere near the nutrient density you'll get from eating a high vegetable-based diet. Calcium, for example, is 600 milligrams a day, I think, in the Okinawans or somewhere in that ballpark, maybe even a little less. I average 1,300 a day without dairy or very, very minimal dairy. So my take is nutrient density trumps the starch. Starch is the base. Nutrient density. But then it goes back to tracking your nutrition, because if you're getting maximum nutrient density, you want to make sure you're actually covered, because just eating real food and eating a lot of vegetables, you may think, well, I'm getting everything. Sometimes it's not that easy. Like zinc, I had to pay very careful attention to zinc. Zinc is in meats. If you're eating meat, you don't have to worry about it at all. But in the beginning, when I first started tracking, I was having a problem just even meeting the RDA. Whereas now I'm more familiar with which foods have it, so I can get it more easily. I don't have to think about it.
Perhaps I could be helpful to you. If you eat pumpkin seeds, huge zinc plus huge amount of fiber.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
Occasionally I do eat pumpkin seeds, yeah. Yep.
About protein intake as a percentage of total calories, what's the conclusion in terms of optimal, least all ACMs? Is it 8.5% or is it the 14%?
Right.
And how does it relate to the composition in human breast milk?
I don't know how it compares in human breast milk, but in terms of the dietary protein study, I go to the circulating biomarker data. So if your protein intake leads to a blood urea nitrogen higher than 15, I'd say your protein intake is too high. But then, if you eat a very low protein diet, and I've had blood urea nitrogen values of 4 on a protein intake of 40 grams a day, is that optimal for muscle mass? And I'd argue that it wasn't. I felt like I was losing muscle mass eating a very low protein diet. So it's an individual-based thing. You've got to find that amount. I have a bodybuilder friend whose blood urea nitrogen is 22, and I tell him all the time, your protein intake is too high. He takes in 170 grams a day or more. So you've got to find that value that, based on your circulating biomarkers, that's how I adjust the protein story.
So I heard that stress can cause acidity in the body. Do you take into account emotional factors that could change your biochemistry?
Right. So for me, this is the lowest stress state I can get into by optimizing my nutrition. So there's a ton of data on even just gut-brain axis. Eat more fiber, and the animals have more short-chain fatty acids, and that has a positive effect on less anxiety and things like that. So knowing that I'm optimizing my nutrition and optimizing my biomarkers, for me, it's low stress. And that's not to say I don't lose my cool sometimes, but who doesn't, right? So, but yeah, stress is a big deal. Trying to minimize it is important.
Yes. What is your recommendation for an atmospheric water machine?
So that would be water that's just exposed to...
No, an atmospheric water machine is a machine you keep in your home, and what it does, it makes drinking water out of the condensation in your home. Of course, it filters it. Some of them put ultraviolet lights or whatever, things like that. But I wanted to know if you had a recommendation for a particular model.
No, I haven't looked into that, but I imagine if you're in the desert and you need water, it'd be a great idea, right?
Did you say that fruits can elevate your triglycerides?
Oh yeah, definitely. Fructose is well known to increase triglycerides.
How much?
Well, I don't know the scale that it does, but I mean, just the fructose that's in like sports drinks and sodas, candy, that's generally what's studied. The fructose in fruit, it's less studied how that increases triglycerides. But I mean, I showed it, when I went fruitarian, my triglycerides doubled. And that's how my body responds. Maybe everybody's different. But yeah, fructose is well known to increase triglycerides.
Okay, so what do you think of organic dark chocolate, 85% dark chocolate?
So
At
what you think of as dark chocolate, I would argue is the beef jerky of steak. What we think is chocolate isn't really chocolate. The chocolate starts from the cocoa bean. Cocoa bean has a ton of fiber. So when I make chocolate, I actually buy raw organic cocoa beans, and I blend them up into a fine powder, and I mix them with medjool dates. And then it's in a consistency that is like the most delicious chocolate you've ever had. So actually once or twice a week, I eat my dark chocolate. And the reason I say the dark chocolate that we think of as the beef jerky to the steak is because they take out the fiber, they take out the vitamins and minerals. What's left is just if you look at the chocolate bar, it has no fiber.
Mine does. Black and green does. It has 4 grams of fiber, 4 or 5 fiber, and
for
it
the
has
bar.
The bar.
Right,
chocolate.
but for one, I think it's 100 calories of cocoa beans. It's like 5 grams of fiber. So if you have a 300 or 200 calorie bar, it's 15 grams.
It's not that much.
Oh, it's a small bar.
Small bar.
All right, well that's
5 servings in a bar. 5 servings.
Oh, 5 servings, and so okay, that's the exception. That's the exception to the. That would be the exception to the rule.
4 grams of protein, 5 grams of 4 grams of protein, 5 grams of fiber,
Right.
4 grams of sugar.
But that's the exception to the rule. Most chocolate does not have fiber, right? I mean, Hershey's chocolate, Ghirardelli, all this stuff.
First thing is cocoa.
I'd say the first thing should be cocoa beans, the whole bean. So, right? It's close. The nibs can be roasted sometimes, and there's the roasting process can produce carcinogenic compounds. So I go raw. If you can get raw nibs, yeah.
What about, did you say what you drank, what kind of water you drank?
I just filtered. I have a filter that I get, and I do now at least. They're not paying me, but I don't want to say their name without paying me. It's a big Berkey. Yeah. And the reason I got that is because it takes out the stuff that my microbiome said I needed to take out. So
We have time for just 3 more questions.
Can you touch on parasites and that leading to alkalinity and then moving up to like Crohn's or colitis?
So I know that we have some low level of parasites that live in our gut, and there's an overgrowth. I don't know enough about the links between parasites with those conditions, but I wish I had a plan to minimize that. But I'd argue that high fiber diet, you're going to optimize the ecosystem in your gut, and that should be able to boost your beneficial microbes that should be in your gut. And once you've done that, that should be able to minimize the pathogenic ones, the increase in fungi that shouldn't be there, or the increase in parasites that shouldn't be there. So a high fiber diet, I'd say, is the only way I know to minimize the parasite thing. Yeah, I don't know anything about that. I haven't studied it.
I was wondering if you take into account fluoride in toothpaste and
Right.
fluoride in the water.
I do. Actually, my microbiome genes are enriched for the degradation of some fluoride-related compounds, and that's the other reason I bought the water filter, because I wanted to take fluoride out of my water. For some reason, my microbiome's hard to take it out, so I don't want to piss off my gut bugs. So. And toothpaste, yeah, I make sure I use very, very little. I actually have two toothpaste. One has no fluoride, the other one has a little bit, just because it has positive effects on mineralization, or enamel mineralization. So, but I use very, very small amount, like half and half. I pour half of one that doesn't have the fluoride and half of the other that has fluoride. So, yeah.
In the long-term longitudinal studies that you get all your mortality rate data from, how do you identify a causative factor for? There's no way.
But you can't. It's just an association. But I'm, as I said, the science journalist will show you the positive data and then the negative data. because it's contradictory. When I do a PubMed search, I'm looking at all the data. If I'm looking up, say, whatever, condition X, and there are 400 abstracts, I literally go through every single one. I look at every single one, and then I look at all of them that have all-cause mortality data. So it isn't even as simple as you look at a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis may have healthy populations and sick populations to get to their conclusion. I'm literally looking at every study that I possibly can to come up with the consensus on that given thing.
Wouldn't you say, though, that an experimental study where you manipulate the variable would carry more weight than the general studies? Because to me, I just think there's so many competing variables going on in a general mortality study that, yes, potassium, if you have more potassium, that could lead to greater life expectancy, but it could be for another reason. Yeah,
for sure. But how do you prove it? And then you have to go to the animal studies, and then that's got its drawbacks. You'll say, well, it works in mice, but so what, we care in humans? There are so very few longitudinal studies in humans. And as I showed that one bit of data from the Baltimore longitudinal study on aging, there are so few longitudinal data-based studies that, I mean, some of it is extrapolation. But the way I see it is if you've got 10 or 20 or 30 biomarkers, and each individual, I think it's synergistic. If the vitamin K data is this and I'm there, well, my risk is low. If the bicarbonate data is this and I'm there, my risk is low. If I cumulatively put all that data together, my risk should be lower than doing nothing or only focusing on one. I tend not to focus on one. It's the whole system, multiple biomarkers. Also, understanding the biochemistry behind these things is essential. For example, you'll get a reference range. Should I be low end? Should I be high end? Should I be middle of the range? Knowing that having too high white blood cells and going low to middle of that range, understanding the biochemistry behind that is important. But most people will probably just say, oh, I'll shoot for the midpoint of the range and think that that's optimally healthy. That's where, I have training in biochemistry as my undergrad, so that's why the biochem is important.
Yeah.
All right.
One more?
Sure, we have time for one last one.
I got plenty of energy for questions, don't worry.
2 questions. Where can we find what you eat in an entire day so we can look at your diet? Is that online?
Yeah, it's on michaellustgarten.wordpress.com.
Great. And the second thing is, as people get older in their 90s, it's very difficult to keep people's albumin up. What would you recommend?
Part of that answer is in that book. So to answer that, you have to understand why albumin decreases with age. And albumin is an acute phase protein, which means it decreases. So what you'll hear is it's inflammation reducing albumin, but it's an acute phase protein, meaning it's a negative acute phase protein. Its levels decrease in times of infection. So as I write in the book, which I didn't obviously talk about much, I believe that aging is accompanied by an increase in infectious burden. How much of these microbes that we're carrying that are in our blood, in our brain, and our muscle, it increases with time. And what the liver does, it eventually starts to give out. It just doesn't have the energy to fight it off. The liver can actually fight these things off. So long story short is, if your albumin levels are decreasing with age, you're battling infectious burden. So I actually noticed my albumin levels, I've been able to get them to the levels of a 20-year-old eating with my vegetable dominant pattern. And I saw it start to decrease a little bit, but once I switched to the vegetable dominant pattern, it started to go back up to, like I said, 20-year-old. And the hypothesis there would be high vegetables, high fiber, 100 grams a day. Your gut can be leaky, and we have trillions of bacteria and other things in our intestines. So if it leaks into the blood, now your immune system has to fight it. Long story short is your liver can get involved too, things like C-reactive protein and downregulating expression of albumin. So if you eat a high fiber diet, your intestine will get less leaky, less stuff will leak into the blood. If it's less is leaking into the blood, now the liver has more energy, it doesn't have to fight off these things, albumin levels should go up. And I actually saw that. Whether or not that's the mechanism, I don't know, but that would be the hypothesis. And it isn't just albumin, the red blood cells go down, the cholesterol goes up, fibrinogen goes up, everything that tells the story metabolically in my eyes for infectious burden, which goes back to the high fiber diet, keeping the stuff out of your blood that you don't want there.
Can I just make one statement?
Yeah.
I have to say that a gastroenterologist does not believe in leaky gut. It's just what they said to me, and
Yeah.
I fought him, and I said, he's like, go on medication, do this. I'm like, leaky gut. And he's
So-
like, I don't even know what that is. Okay.
Yeah.
Just so
So so that's one gastroenterologist. But if you look at the published literature, there are even bacteria found in our red blood cells, in red blood cell and white blood cell infected bacteria. A recent paper this year actually showed circulating bacterial DNA. Not just a little bit, a lot. Where's it coming from? It can come from the mouth, it can come from the gut. So that's why I say it's just one, that gastroenterologist probably is not in tune. Doesn't matter. Yeah. It's not, there's a growing literature that stuff is leaking into the blood. Bacteria is found in plaques of heart disease patients. Where's it coming from? It's got to come from somewhere, right? So mouth, skin, gut, something's leaking. So. Yeah. Superfoods are bullshit. There's food, right? I just don't like that people call them superfoods. I think it's just marketing hype. But acai is, I mean, you know, it's got health benefits. It's loaded with antioxidants. You know, quinoa, right? Touted as a superfood. It's got, right? But I don't look at it as superfood. It's food. Smoothies, I definitely do smoothies. Not juicing, because you lose the fiber if you juice it. And I've got a couple recipes. I make a beet berry smoothie. I didn't like to eat beets at all, so I found a way to put it in a smoothie. Raw beets, giant raw beets, not like little baby beets. And then also spinach and pineapple and raw ginger. So yeah, I'm a fan of smoothies.
Okay, Dr. Michael Lustgarten. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil.
Good
All right.
You know, it's so important to take charge of your own personal health. And so you might get one doctor to say one thing and another doctor to say another thing, but you've got to look at your biomarkers, you've got to look at your blood tests, you've got to look at yourself and determine what suits you. I think Dr. Michael Lustgarten will agree with me that what he has shown you is what works for him, but each person will have to really look at your own diet. You'll have to look at your own intake and what works for you. And that's the most important thing. So thank you for coming tonight. Again, next month we will not be here. We're all going to many of us are going to the RAD Festival, so we're preparing for the Revolution Against Aging and Death Festival. For information on that, go to radfest.com. And if you'd like to sign up, use the word perpetual. It's your keyword to save some money on that festival. If you'd like to check out a book, they're in the back. And if I missed your email address, please give it to me so I can stay in touch with you and tell you about our next presentation. Thank you for attending this evening. We do have a reception for Dr. Lustgarten downstairs. Please join us. We have a very healthy meal down there. So we'll see you downstairs, and you can ask them for more answers.
It's called Forever Young. May the good Lord be with you down every road you roll. And may sunshine and happiness surround you when you're far from home. And may you grow to be proud, dignified and true. And do unto others as you'd have done to you. Courageous and be brave, and in my heart you'll always stay. Forever young, forever young, forever young, forever young. May good fortune be with you, may your guiding light be strong. Build a stairway to heaven with a prince or a vagabond. May you